The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the dry, cracked earth of the Wyoming plains. Dust swirled along the rutted trail as young Tommy ran toward the ranch house, his small boots kicking up clouds that caught the last golden rays. Breathless and panicked, he burst through the half-open door, eyes wide, hands trembling. "Mr. Hide my mom if they come," he cried, voice cracking with fear. His small fingers clutched the brim of his hat as if it were a shield against the unknown. Jed Lawson. The rancher stood by the kitchen door, leaning on his rough-hewn cane. He had a face weathered by sun and storms, eyes sharp and calculating beneath a hat that had seen more than its share of dusty trails. He met Tommy's gaze without blinking. "Over my dead body," Jed said, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of years spent defending his land, his people, and now, apparently, someone else's. Tommy's mother, Clara, stood behind him, her hands wringing a faded apron. The worry etched in her face told Jed everything he needed to know. Something was coming, and it wasn't friendly. Clara's chest rose and fell quickly as she tried to maintain composure for her son. Jed pushed off the doorframe and stepped into the sun. Dust clung to his boots, and the leather of his gun belt creaked as he moved. His eyes scanned the horizon, searching the long stretches of open prairie. Wolves of men, Jed thought, bandits, or worse. "They'll be here by sundown," Tommy stammered, voice trembling. "I saw them riding past the creek. They had black hats." Jed's jaw tightened. He'd faced outlaws before, men who'd kill without a thought for land or life, but the urgency in the boy's plea was different, more personal, more desperate. Jed felt a stubborn resolve settle in his chest. He would protect them, no matter the cost. Clara stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "Jed, you don't have to." "I do," Jed interrupted, tipping his hat back slightly. The wind tugged at his coat, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and distant rain. "No one's taking you or the boy on my watch." Tommy looked from Jed to his mother, hope mingling with fear. "Promise?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jed knelt to meet the boy's gaze, placing a calloused hand on his shoulder. "I swear it." The sound of hooves on the distant trail cut through the tense silence. Jed's eyes narrowed. The sun was sinking fast, bleeding red into the plains, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for them. Clara clutched Tommy to her side as Jed reached for his rifle, checking the chamber with a practiced hand. "Stay inside," Jed said, his voice low but commanding. "Lock the doors. Don't make a sound." Clara hesitated, torn between gratitude and fear. She had known Jed only in passing respectfully, from the market and chance encounters, but never like this. Now, seeing the set of his jaw and the determination in his gaze, she felt a spark of something she hadn't dared to acknowledge before. Trust, and something more dangerous. Attraction. The wind carried the faint clatter of spurs, the occasional jingle of a horse's harness. Jed moved with quiet precision, placing a chair against the door and drawing the curtains. He glanced back at Clara, who met his gaze for a long moment. Words were unnecessary. The understanding passed between them, silent and electric. Nightfall was coming, and with it, danger. Jed's mind raced through contingencies, the terrain, the number of men, the possibility of escape. He would need to fight, and if fighting didn't work, he would need to hide Clara and Tommy somewhere safe. But even as his mind focused on tactics, Jed couldn't shake the flicker of admiration he felt for Clara. Strong, calm, and unyielding in the face of fear, she was unlike anyone he had ever met on the plains. A shadow crossed the horizon, tall and moving swiftly. Jed raised his rifle, positioning himself near the edge of the porch. The wind carried the smell of smoke and horses, of men intent on trouble. Tommy clung to his mother, glancing at Jed with wide eyes. They're here." Jed nodded grimly, shoulders squared, his gaze fixed on the approaching threat. The sun disappeared behind the hills, leaving the plains bathed in the fiery glow of twilight. "Then let's show them," Jed muttered under his breath. "They made a mistake coming here." And with that, the silent promise of protection, and perhaps something deeper, hung over the ranch like the approaching storm. Night had fallen like a velvet curtain over the Wyoming plains, leaving only the faint glimmer of stars above and the occasional flicker of a lantern in the distance. Inside the Lawson ranch, Clara and Tommy huddled near the hearth. The firelight danced across the walls, casting moving shadows that seemed almost alive. Flickering with the tension in the room, Tommy's small hands clutched his mother's sleeve as she whispered reassurances. She didn't quite believe herself. Jed had taken up a position near the barn, his rifle ready and senses sharp. The ranch had been his domain for decades. He knew every ridge, every shadow, every whisper of wind that hinted at danger, and tonight, danger wasn't subtle. The outlaws arrived under the cover of darkness. Their horses' hooves muffled against the soft dirt, their black hats like ominous spears in the moonlight. Jed could see them now, 3 figures moving cautiously toward the ranch, scanning for signs of life. His eyes narrowed. They were professionals, no hesitation in their steps, no idle chatter. Men who had killed before and would do so again if provoked. Jed crouched low behind the split-rail fence, loading his rifle with deliberate care. The fire in the cabin threw a glow that painted the barn in flickering gold. He could hear the faint whispers of Clara and Tommy inside, the soft creak of the porch boards beneath his boots as he positioned himself for a clear line of sight. The first man crested the hill, silhouetted against the horizon. Jed exhaled slowly, steadying his aim. He didn't want to fire yet, not until he knew the threat was immediate. But every muscle in his body was taut and ready. Inside, Clara's heart raced. She had seen danger before in the stories of frontier life, but never this close, never this tangible. And yet, even in fear, a strange warmth fluttered within her whenever she thought of Jed. Out there alone, standing between her family and death. She hadn't meant to feel it. She had tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. There was a bravery in him that stirred something long dormant in her chest. The outlaws moved closer, stopping at the edge of the property line. Their leader, taller than the others, stepped forward and let out a low whistle. "Jed Lawson," he called, his voice carrying across the quiet night. "We've come for what's owed. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Jed's jaw tightened. "You've got nothing coming," he said, voice steady, unyielding. "Leave now, or you'll regret it." A laugh rolled from the man like distant thunder. "Regret? Maybe, but that's a risk we're willing to take." From the cabin, Tommy peeked through the curtains, eyes wide with fear. Clara placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "Stay back," she whispered. "Jed knows what he's doing." Jed adjusted his aim, taking note of the rocky terrain that gave him the advantage. One wrong move and they could flank him, but he had anticipated that. Years on the plains had taught him strategy, patience, observation, the importance of holding your ground when others would panic. Suddenly, a shot rang out, not from Jed, but from the outlaws. A bullet ricocheted off the barn, sending splinters flying. Tommy screamed, clutching his mother. Jed ducked instinctively, his rifle snapping up as he took aim at the nearest threat. The firefight was quick, brutal, and loud in the silence of the night. Jed fired deliberately, making every shot count. One of the men went down, clutching his shoulder, and the others staggered back. Momentarily stunned by Yet's marksmanship, Clara's pulse pounded in her ears. She had always imagined the West as wide, lonely, romantic, but she had never imagined it this way. Her life balanced on the edge of a rifle. The man she was beginning to care for, facing danger for her family. Her chest ached with a mixture of fear and admiration. Jed moved like a shadow, striking from behind the cover of barrels and fences. He was precise, controlled, a man in his element. One by one, the outlaws fell back, realizing they were outmatched. But their leader, the tallest one, lingered, eyes blazing with anger and the thrill of the hunt. Clara felt her breath catch as Jed emerged from the shadows, rifle at the ready. For a moment, their eyes met. There was no need for words. The unspoken understanding passed between them. He would protect them. He would not falter. And in that moment, something stronger began to grow, an unacknowledged connection that neither had expected but both felt. The leader of the outlaws gritted his teeth, realizing Jed was not a man to intimidate. With a curse, he signaled retreat. The sound of hooves faded into the night, leaving the ranch in an eerie silence, broken only by the crackle of the dying fire. Jed lowered his rifle and took a deep breath. His eyes met Clara's once more, and though the danger had passed, the tension between them remained, thick and electric. "You," Clara began, but words failed her. Jed only tipped his hat, a half-smile breaking through the grim set of his features. "I told you," he said softly, "over my dead body." And for the first time, Clara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could survive this wild land together, he, the rugged protector, and she, the woman who had caught his heart without even trying. The first light of dawn painted the plains in soft oranges and golds, washing over the Lawson ranch like a quiet blessing after the chaos of the night before. The air smelled of sagebrush and sun-warmed earth, carrying a hint of smoke from last night's skirmish. Clara moved cautiously through the cabin, her hands trembling slightly as she checked that Tommy was still asleep, curled up under his quilt. Jed was already outside, tending to the damage the outlaws had left behind. One of the fence rails had splintered, and a hoofprint had gouged the earth near the barn door. He worked with the efficiency of a man used to fixing what others destroyed, his movements deliberate, precise. But even in the quiet morning, there was an alertness in his eyes that refused to fade. Clara stepped out onto the porch, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She hesitated a moment, unsure whether she should approach or retreat, but something in Yet's steady focus called to her. He looked up and nodded once, a small acknowledgement that she had been seen, that she was safe for now. "Morning," she said softly, her voice almost lost in the whisper of the wind through the tall grass. Jed wiped his hands on his coat and straightened. "Morning. Sleep well." His tone was gruff, but there was a faint warmth hidden beneath the surface. "I did, eventually," she admitted, glancing toward the barn, where the splintered wood stood as a reminder of danger. "Thank you for last night. I don't know what we would have done without you." Jed shrugged, though the faintest flicker of color brushed his cheeks. "Just doing my job," he said. "And yours. And Tommy's. Reckon that makes me a friend too." "Huh." Clara allowed herself a small smile. "More than a friend," she said before she could stop herself. The words hung in the air, vulnerable and daring, and for a moment, Jed didn't answer. Instead, he gestured toward the broken fence. "Help me fix this," he asked, a simple invitation, yet laden with meaning. They worked side by side, passing boards and nails, hands occasionally brushing. Each touch was electric, a silent promise of something more than safety. A connection forged not just in proximity but in trust. Tommy appeared then, rubbing his eyes, still half asleep. "Mom," he whispered, "is it over?" Clara knelt and pulled him close, feeling the warmth of his small body against hers. "For now, sweetheart, Jet's taken care of it." Jed smiled at the boy, a rare softness in his rugged features. "I'm not leaving anyone behind," he said simply. And Tommy's eyes lit up with a mixture of awe and relief. As the day progressed, the ranch came alive again. Horses were fed, water troughs refilled, and the lingering fear of last night began to fade. Yet, in the back of Clara's mind, she couldn't shake the thought of Jed standing out there in the open, vigilant as ever. She admired him no more than admired. There was a fierceness in him, a steadfastness that made her heart race in ways she hadn't expected. Jed, for his part, felt a stirring in his chest he had long denied. He had lived a life of solitude, of dust and sun, cattle and storms. Romance had always been a luxury he didn't allow himself. But Clara, her courage, her quiet strength, the way she looked at the horizon with hope even when danger threatened was a spark he could not ignore. When they paused for lunch, sitting on the edge of the porch with bread, cheese, and warm stew, their conversation was light but filled with an unspoken acknowledgement of the bond forming between them. Jed found himself lingering on her laughter, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, the subtle grace in her movements. "Jed," Clara said finally, breaking a comfortable silence, "how do you do it? Face men like that and stay so calm." He looked at her, and for the first time, allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. "You learn that fear won't save you. It'll only slow you down. You focus on what matters, protect what you can, and move when you have to. That's all there is to it." She nodded, understanding more than he realized. Her gaze lingered on him, softening. I think I'm beginning to understand you. And maybe, I trust you more than anyone I've ever met." Jet's hand brushed hers accidentally, and neither moved it away. The contact was brief, but charged with intent, a silent agreement that their connection was growing stronger by the time the sun dipped low over the plains again, painting the world in crimson and gold. Both of them knew that the events of the previous night had changed everything, not just for the safety of the ranch, but for the possibility of a life together, a life where danger and romance coexisted on the wide-open frontier. The embers of trust, once flickering uncertainly, now burned steadily between them. And as Jed watched Clara gather Tommy close under the soft twilight, he felt something rare and precious awaken in him. Hope that they could survive what the West threw at them, and maybe, just maybe, find love along the way. The morning sun crested over the hills like a cautious observer, spilling pale light across the Lawson Ranch. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and the earthy tang of dew-soaked soil. Clara stood near the edge of the corral, brushing the dust from Tommy's hair while keeping a watchful eye on Jed, who was already saddling his horse. Jed's movements were methodical, almost ritualistic, each motion executed with precision born of years of survival on the plains. Clara couldn't help but notice the way his hands moved over the leather. Strong yet careful, commanding respect without even trying. She had watched him for days now, realizing that the danger he faced wasn't just in the outlaws who had threatened them, but in the relentless, unforgiving land itself. "Jed," Clara called, her voice carrying softly across the corral. He looked up, meeting her gaze. "Do you really have to go out today?" He hesitated, tightening the straps of his saddle. "I need to check the North Ridge," he replied, voice low and steady. "Couldn't sleep easy knowing the outlaws might come back from that side. Best I make sure the land's safe." She bit her lip, torn between fear and admiration. I don't want anything to happen to you." Jed's eyes softened, and for a moment, the ruggedness in him seemed to fade, leaving only a man who had found someone worth protecting. "Clara, I'll be careful," he said, resting a rough hand against her cheek. "You and Tommy, you're safe here, I promise." Tommy tugged at her skirt, peering up at Jed with wide eyes. "Will you be back soon?" he asked. Jed knelt to the boy's level, gripping his small shoulders firmly. "I'll be back, partner. Just keep an eye on your mom." "Okay." Tommy nodded solemnly, the kind of solemnness only a child who has glimpsed danger could muster. Once Jed rode off, Clara felt the emptiness immediately. She had begun to realize something she hadn't anticipated. Her heart had started to rely on his presence. Even the way he walked, the way he carried himself, there was comfort in his steadiness. And now, with him gone, the quiet of the ranch seemed sharper, heavier, somehow incomplete. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, casting harsh shadows across the plains. Clara busied herself with chores, yet every sound, the creak of a post, the whisper of the wind, the distant caw of a crow made her heart jump. Every shadow seemed longer than it should be. Every rustle in the grass could be another threat. Just as she began to calm, a cloud of dust rose over the ridge. Clara's stomach twisted. She rushed to the porch, squinting into the distance. It wasn't Jed's familiar horse trotting calmly toward the ranch. It was a group of riders, black hats glinting menacingly in the sun. Panic surged, but Clara's fear was tempered now by the lessons of the past days. She grabbed Tommy and pulled him inside, locking the doors and drawing the curtains. Her mind raced. Where could they hide? The cellar was too small, the barn too exposed. There was one last place Jed had mentioned in passing. A rocky outcrop behind the ranch. With enough cover for them to remain unseen, Clara moved quickly, her pulse hammering in her ears. She and Tommy crept out the back door, keeping low, hearts pounding with every footstep. The riders approached closer, their laughter cruel, confident. The threat was tangible now, pressing in on them from all sides. From the cover of the rocks, Clara watched as Jed rode into view, his rifle in hand. Eyes scanning the approaching men, relief and admiration surged through her. He was back and, not just alive, but ready to face the danger head-on. Jed dismounted with a fluid motion, pulling Tommy into the safety of the rocks with Clara. He crouched beside them, calm and commanding, and whispered instructions. "Stay low, don't move until I say, and remember, whatever happens, I've got you." The outlaws rode past, unaware of the small trio hidden behind the jagged stones. Jed's eyes never wavered, watching every movement, every shadow. When they finally disappeared over the next ridge, he exhaled slowly, allowing himself a brief moment of reprieve. Clara turned to him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "Jed, you risked everything for us," she said, her voice trembling. "Why?" Jed looked at her, something raw and unspoken in his gaze. "Because you're worth it," he said simply. "You and Tommy. And maybe, I'm beginning to realize, you're worth more than I thought I could care for someone." The words hung between them, heavier than any threat. Clara's heart leaped, a mix of fear and exhilaration. She stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Jed, I think I feel the same way." For a long moment, the wind carried nothing but the sound of their breathing. The distant clatter of hooves, fading into memory. Two souls, hardened by the West, had found something delicate and rare in the midst of dust, danger, and blood. As the sun dipped again, casting long shadows across the ranch, Clara and Jed sat together behind the rocks. Tommy nestled between them, exhausted but safe. And in the quiet aftermath of danger, the first true embers of love began to burn, fragile but persistent, promising a future even amid the harsh wilderness. The Lawson Ranch settled into uneasy quiet after the morning's terror, but Jed knew better than to trust silence in the West. Outlaws didn't simply vanish, they regrouped, they schemed, and they returned with a grudge. The man who had led the raid last week wasn't the sort to forget being humiliated by a single man armed with a rifle and courage. Jed rode slowly along the northern ridge, scanning the horizon, every sense tuned to danger. The wind whispered through the tall grasses like a warning. carrying faint smells of smoke and horse leather from far-off trails. He stopped atop a rise, lowering his binoculars to examine the distant hills. Nothing yet, but he could feel it. The tension in the air was thick, like a storm about to break. Back at the ranch, Clara worked tirelessly, mending fences and tending to the horses, all the while keeping Tommy close. Her nerves were taut, but she had grown steadier since last week's attack. She had watched Jed face danger without hesitation, and it had sparked something within her, a determination not to cower in fear, but to stand firm beside him, even if only in spirit. As afternoon heat softened into golden twilight, Jed returned to the ranch. His horse was tired, dust caked on its coat, and Jed himself carried the weariness of constant vigilance. Clara was waiting on the porch, hands folded, eyes sharp as he approached. "You found anything?" she asked, her voice calm but tinged with worry. Jed dismounted, running a hand over his jaw. "Not yet, but I don't like leaving this land unguarded," he replied. "Outlaws don't give up easily. They'll be back. And next time, they'll come stronger." Clara's heart thudded in response, but her resolve hardened. "Then we'll be ready," she said. There was no question, no hesitation. She would face this threat with him. Jed's eyes softened as he studied her. She was no delicate flower of the frontier. She was brave, steadfast, and sharp. And that courage drew him in more than he had expected. "You're something else, Clara," he said quietly. "I don't think anyone's ever stood so firm in the face of danger." Clara felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "I've had the best teacher," she murmured, nodding toward him. As the sun dipped lower, they prepared the ranch for the worst. Jed stationed himself near the barn with his rifle, eyes constantly moving across the landscape. Clara, despite the tension, moved with deliberate purpose, ensuring the livestock were safe, and Tommy was calm. They fell into a rhythm, the dangerous familiarity of life on the frontier binding them together in a silent trust deeper than words. Night fell abruptly, carrying with it a chill and a shroud of darkness. The wind carried the scent of smoke from far off, and Clara's heart jumped. Jed signaled her to come closer, crouching low beside her as they surveyed the shadowed hills. "There," he whispered, pointing toward a distant ridge. Faint movement betrayed the presence of horses, and the glint of moonlight off metal suggested they were armed. The outlaws had returned. Jed's hand rested briefly on Clara's shoulder. A grounding touch, before he moved to take his position. Clara clutched Tommy close, heart racing, yet a strange, fierce pride filled her chest. She had chosen to trust Jed, and now she would face this threat with him. The outlaws approached, their horses kicking up dust, voices low and threatening. Jed fired a warning shot into the air. "Leave now, and I won't have to aim next time." A laugh answered him. "Lawson, you're brave, but foolish. This land belongs to us now." The standoff stretched, taut as a bowstring. Jed's steady gaze never wavered. Clara felt her chest tighten with both fear and something else, something warmer. She realized that every time he risked his life for them, every calculated movement, every warning shot, it wasn't just about survival, it was about love, fierce and unspoken. The leader of the outlaws dismounted, pacing slowly toward the ranch, eyes never leaving Jed. "You think you can protect them all? You can't?" he sneered. Jed's hand rested firmly on his rifle. "Try me." The night erupted in a flurry of dust, gunfire, and shouted threats. Clara and Tommy stayed low behind the barn, hearts pounding, as Jed moved with precision. Every shot deliberate, every breath measured. Even amid chaos, his presence was a steady anchor. When the dust finally settled, the outlaws lay retreating, battered and broken, forced to acknowledge Jed's unwavering defense. Clara rushed to him, her heart hammering in tandem with relief and admiration. Jed turned to her, face streaked with dirt and sweat, eyes glowing with intensity. "You were brave tonight," he said softly. "All of you." Clara stepped closer, brushing dust from his coat. "We're brave together," she whispered. And in the quiet aftermath of violence, as stars twinkled over the endless plains, their hands found each other, fingers entwining, unspoken words passing between them, survival, trust, and a love forged in the wild heart of the West. The Lawson Ranch settled into a fragile peace after the clash with the outlaws. The evening air was heavy with the scent of spent gunpowder and scorched earth, but it also carried a quiet sense of triumph. Jed moved among the horses and cattle, checking for injuries, while Clara worked at the edge of the corral, wiping soot from her hands and making sure Tommy was calm after the night's terror. It was the first time since their arrival that Clara allowed herself to truly breathe. For days, the shadow of danger had pressed down on her chest, threatening to crush her. But now, with Jed at her side, the the fear had shifted to something else, a fierce, protective warmth that coiled around her heart. Jed noticed her glancing toward him and walked over, a soft smile breaking through the dirt and grit on his face. "You handled yourself well last night," he said quietly. "More than I expected." Clara's cheeks warmed, and she tried to look away. "I had help," she admitted, "the best kind." Jed's eyes softened, and he reached for her hand, brushing his thumb over hers. "Not just help," he said. "You were brave. You were steady. You stayed calm when it mattered most. That matters more than you think." The words made Clara's heart flutter. The West was no place for idle words or sentimentalities. Yet here he was, speaking the truth of his heart. And without thinking, she found herself stepping closer to him, feeling the heat of his presence in a way that made her pulse quicken. Tommy approached then, holding a small bundle of wildflowers he had picked on the ridge. "For you, Mom," he said shyly, "and for Mr. Jed too." Jed chuckled softly, taking the flowers from Tommy. "Thanks, partner," he said, tucking the blooms into his coat. He glanced at Clara, and in that moment, words were unnecessary. There was a quiet understanding between them, one born not of talk, but of shared danger, shared triumph, and the fragile trust that had grown into something deeper. That night, the ranch was calm for the first time in weeks. Stars spilled across the sky like spilled silver, and the prairie hummed with the soft sounds of nocturnal life. Jed built a small fire near the barn, and Clara and Tommy joined him, the warmth of the flames matching the warmth blossoming in her chest. Jed poked at the fire, sending a shower of sparks into the night. "You ever think about leaving all this behind?" he asked suddenly, his voice low and thoughtful. "Finding some place calmer?" Clara tilted her head, meeting his gaze. "I think about it sometimes," she admitted, "but then I remember why we're here. This land, it's ours. And I don't think I could leave it. Not now. Not when there's so much to protect. And someone worth protecting with." Jed's lips curved into a slow, appreciative smile. "I was hoping you'd say that," he murmured. He moved closer, and the distance between them vanished. For a moment, all the fear, all the danger, all the uncertainty of the West faded away. There was only the two of them, the fire crackling between them, and the quiet knowledge that they had found something rare in the harsh wilderness. Love that could endure anything. Clara felt herself leaning into him, drawn by a force stronger than fear or reason. "Jed," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I don't want this to end. Not like this. Not ever." Jed cupped her face with rough, calloused hands. "It won't," he promised, his eyes fierce and unwavering. "I'll fight for this. For you. For us. As long as I'm breathing. You and Tommy mean more to me than anything on this land or in the world." Tears pricked Clara's eyes, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming relief and joy of being seen, understood, and loved. She pressed her forehead to his, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat, a rhythm that mirrored her own. The fire crackled, sending a warm glow over their faces, and Tommy, watching quietly, felt a sense of safety he hadn't known in weeks. For once, he believed that the world could be a place of courage, love, and protection. Jed leaned in slowly, giving Clara the chance to pull away, though she didn't. Their lips met, tender at first, testing, discovering. The kiss deepened, not hurried, but deliberate, a promise forged in fire, sweat, and the wild heart of the West. The night stretched on, quiet, save for the gentle crackle of the fire and the distant call of coyotes. Jed held Clara close, Tommy tucked safely between them, and for the first time, the ranch felt truly like home. For Jed and Clara, the West was still dangerous, still unpredictable, but they had each other, and in that truth, they found the courage to face whatever lay ahead. Together, the dawn rose pale and cold over the Lawson Ranch, casting long shadows across the fields. Mist curled like ghostly fingers over the hills, and the faint chill in the air carried a promise of confrontation. Jed had sensed it in his bones the night before. This wasn't the end of the outlaws, only their final reckoning. Clara stood at the edge of the corral, Tommy beside her, her hands clenched tightly around his small ones. She had spent the night in restless anticipation, worrying yet trusting Jed. The man who had become more than just a protector, he had become her anchor, her courage, and her heart. Jed approached from the barn, rifle slung over his shoulder, boots crunching on the frost-hardened earth. The early sunlight caught in his hair, and for a moment, he looked almost like a figure from a dream, a man who could withstand any danger and still love fiercely. "You ready for this?" he asked, voice low, steady. Carrying the weight of a man who had seen too much yet refused to bend, Clara met his gaze. a mixture of fear and unwavering determination in her eyes. "I'm ready," she said. "We'll face it together." Jed nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had forged through danger, desperation, and the slow-burning embers of love. He mounted his horse, and Clara led Tommy to a hidden spot near the creek, behind thick brush that offered cover while allowing them to see what unfolded. The outlaws appeared on the ridge, their numbers smaller but fiercer than before. Their leader, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, dismounted, flanked by his remaining gang. "Lawson," he spat, voice filled with venom. "This is the last time. Surrender, and maybe we'll leave your little family alive." Jed's jaw tightened. "You've got one last chance to turn around. Leave now, and no one gets hurt." A tense silence followed, broken only by the wind rustling the tall prairie grass. Then, the leader laughed, a cold, mocking sound that grated against the nerves. "I like your spirit, Lawson, but this land isn't yours. Not anymore." The fight erupted with the suddenness of a thunderclap. Jed moved like a shadow, rifle raised, every shot precise, calculated. Dust and earth flew as gunfire crackled across the valley. Clara's heart hammered as she crouched behind the brush, holding Tommy close, yet she refused to look away. She had seen Jed fight before, but now, with the stakes higher than ever, his courage burned brighter than the rising sun. Minutes stretched like hours. Every movement counted. Jed's presence was magnetic, fearless, relentless, protecting them not just with skill, but with the unspoken promise of love. Clara found herself whispering encouragement, as much to herself as to him. Come back to us finally." The last outlaw fell, limping and defeated, and their leader, seeing his men gone, turned to flee. Jed didn't hesitate, he rode after him, boots digging into the stirrups, rifle steady. A single, final shot rang out, echoing across the hills. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of Jed's horse slowing to a walk. Clara ran toward him as soon as he returned, throwing herself into his arms. "Jed, you." Her words broke into a sob of relief. Jed held her tightly, forehead pressed to hers, feeling her warmth and strength. "We're safe," he murmured, voice rough with emotion. "All of us. We're safe." Tommy ran to them, throwing his arms around both Jed and Clara, laughing through tears. "You did it. You really did it." The sun climbed higher, bathing the ranch in golden light. The air was crisp, alive with possibility. Jed stood tall, Clara at his side, their hands entwined. The battle was over, and yet what they had fought for, love, family, and home, was only beginning. Clara looked at Jed, her heart swelling. "I was so scared," she admitted, "but I knew you'd come back. You always do." Jed smiled, brushing a hand over her cheek. "Because I promised," he said, "and a Lawson keeps his promises, especially the important ones." They stood there, holding each other as the ranch stretched out before them, dusty, worn, but alive, waiting for their care. The prairie whispered around them, the wind carrying not danger, but freedom. In the days that followed, the ranch returned to life, cattle grazing, horses neighing, and Tommy playing near the creek. Jed and Clara worked side by side, their love no longer unspoken, their bond unbreakable. The West remained wild and untamed, but for them, it was a land of possibility, courage, and the enduring promise of tomorrow. And on that ranch, under the vast, endless sky, Jed and Clara discovered something that outlaws and gunfights could never take away. A love as steadfast and eternal as the frontier itself. The horizon stretched wide, golden, and bright. The past was conquered, the danger was behind them, and together, they rode into the future, hand in hand, hearts bound, ready for whatever the West would throw their way next.